Greek mythology and Greek myths are not just made-up stories from thousands of years ago with no historical backing, just kind of made up to explain other events going on at the time, and this video is going to demonstrate that. I'm really excited about this video because honestly I think it adds so much to the context of Greek mythology. It shows not just that these people had incredibly good storytelling skills, but a lot of their stories probably came from some, if not all, real events. So here are 5 of the most infamous Greek myths that actually happened based off of archaeological, geological, and geographical evidence. Number 1. The Trojan War. The Trojan War, as recounted in Greek mythology, was an epic war between ancient Greeks and ancient Trojans that lasted about 10 years and featured many great heroes such as the mythical Achilles, the scheming Odysseus, the courageous Hector, who a good friend of mine likes to describe as the most effed over character in history, as well as the mythological events such as the abduction of Helen, the impregnable Trojan walls, and the Trojan horse. Now, the Trojan War is one of the most famous conflicts in ancient history, hands down. Mythological or not, it is one of the most famous conflicts. Much of what we know from this war comes from Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey, which were written about 500 years after the war supposedly occurred. And for most of human history, prominent historians believed that the war was only a myth or was an allegory that was passed down by the Greeks to describe some sort of other events, some sort of turmoil at the time, etc. That changed, however, in the 1860s when an amateur archaeologist named Frank Calvert managed to uncover the actual ruins of the Trojan War, which are located just off the coast of modern-day Turkey. The site matched the description of the Trojan city as told by Homer, and a number of artifacts, including the treasure of Priam, and some evidence of warfare such as arrowheads and armor, were discovered by a later archaeologist named Heinrich Schliemann, who excavated the site further. These discoveries largely confirmed that the ruins are the site of the real city of Troy and that an actual military conflict had taken place there at the time that the Trojan War was said to have taken place. And sure, maybe this war wasn't as epic as it's made to be in the myths, maybe there were no interventions of gods into the war, etc. But it does seem pretty clear that the Trojan War did occur. In my opinion, this is one of the most exciting archaeological discoveries that have ever been made because it shows that this myth is not only incredibly exciting, which it is, it just also can't be dismissed as a cool story. It has to be taken seriously. And now we can have debates over, sure, who existed, who didn't, which parts were exaggerated, which weren't. But what we can't really debate, in my opinion, is whether or not this actually happened and whether or not Homer was writing about a real war, because the evidence seems to indicate that he was. And incredibly excitingly, these ruins can still be visited today. It's an open tourist attraction. It's a UNESCO protected heritage site. If you want to go see these ruins, you can. Anyways, that's number 1. I think that's pretty cool. Number 2, the Labyrinth. The Labyrinth, as discussed in previous videos on this channel, was a complex maze that was supposed to be built by Daedalus, who was a master craftsman and appears in many ancient Greek myths as a way to imprison the Minotaur, a giant human flesh-eating half-man, half-bull creature. According to the myths, the labyrinth was said to be located on the island of Crete, underneath or right near King Minos' palace. Again, this was believed to be only a myth, that is, until archaeologists found the Palace of Knossos, which is believed to be the actual palace of King Minos of Crete between the years of 1878 and 1900. What archaeologists found there was an incredible compound with complex tunnels and walls that were clearly of some sort of architectural significance and cultural significance to the inhabitants of Crete. Here you can see a silver coin, a currency with the labyrinth impression on it dating back to this time. So what do we have here? Let's recap. We have a palace that up until 1878 was said to be a myth, but turns out is actually real. It fits the description of the palace that was supposed to be belonging to a king who was said, again, to be a myth. And it fits the physical description of the labyrinth, which again was supposed to be a myth. In other words, all 3 things that were previously thought to be myths are discovered to be actually having some historical truth to them. And again, to me, this is very exciting because it adds credence to the fact that these events, or the people in them, they existed. They may not have existed in the exact way that the myths made them out to be, but these were real people. And that to me is awesome. And again, like the ruins of Troy, these ruins can still be visited today. They're in Knossos. So next time you're in Greece, take a ferry or a trip over to Crete and go visit the birthplace of the labyrinth. Number 3, the myth of Jason and the Argonauts and the Golden Fleece. You're not going to believe this one. The myth of Jason and the Argonauts revolves around Jason's quest for the Golden Fleece. What is the Golden Fleece, you ask? Well, it is a fleece made out of gold. No, a little more than that. It was said to be the fleece of a golden ram named Chrysomalos, who was the son of Poseidon. According to the myth, the hero Jason was sent by his uncle Peleus on an impossible mission to retrieve a golden fleece from an ancient city called Colchis, which would be in modern-day Georgia, not the United States Georgia, in hopes that Jason would perish in this attempt to try and obtain this golden fleece. Jason assembled a crew of heroes called the Argonauts to board his ship called the Argo, hence the name Argonauts, and headed off to Colchis to take on this quest. Like most heroes, Jason didn't give a shit if it was dangerous or not, he's ready to go. Upon reaching Colchis, Jason faced a number of challenges by the king of Colchis, including yoking fire-breathing bulls and sowing a field with dragon's teeth. With the help of a woman named Medea, who was also, in fact, a sorceress, Jason was able to overcome these obstacles and eventually obtained the Golden Fleece. Obviously, this sounds like a completely random and made-up myth. Dragon's teeth, we have sorceresses and golden sheep fleeces, what's going on here? But geologists and archaeologists now contend that this was actually based on real events and that the Golden Fleece was a real thing. That's right, the Golden Fleece, made out of a sheepskin or a ram skin, was a real artifact. What's the evidence of this? Well, a complete stroke of luck. The evidence supporting this myth emerged when a Tholos tomb dating back to the 14th century BC, which is when this myth was supposed to have taken place, was discovered in Volos in Greece. Its discovery is honestly pretty crazy. In this town, they were doing some renovations on a road, and when they went to go excavate some of the ground, they hit the dome of a building that had been built back in the 14th century. It had been so well constructed and the roof was so well built that they didn't break through the roof. So they were able to slowly excavate the entirety of the tomb and see what was inside. And what was inside was a ton of artifacts and gold that had been kept there since it was buried there, again, about 3,500 years ago. The gold was sent to the Louvre in France for tests, and the origins of the gold were traced back to, that's right, you guessed it, the Savanti region of Georgia, or as it would have been known 3,500 years ago in the time of Jason, the Kingdom of Colchis. And what's even crazier is that in this region where the gold was found, they mined for gold, and they have collected gold in this one particular way for thousands of years. And that way is by submerging a sheep fleece in rivers, collecting gold in the fibers of the fleece and turning the fleece a hue of gold in the process. I.e., they make a golden fleece. They had golden fleeces in the area that Jason was supposed to have traveled to collect a golden fleece. The discovery supports the idea that the myth of the Golden Fleece could be rooted in a real event or a real events, an actual expedition by someone or a group of people to retrieve this type of gold. Absolutely wild. Number 4, the Amazons. According to Greek mythology, the Amazons were a race of female-only warriors who lived in the later Bronze Age northeast of Greece. The Amazons were said to be the daughters of Ares, the god of war. According to Homer, our old buddy Homer, they challenged the masculinity and the fighting abilities of Greeks on the battlefield, and there are a number of stories and ancient Greek myths where they go toe-to-toe with the ancient Greek heroes, such as against Heracles, against Achilles, against Theseus. They really knew how to fight. Now, while these warriors were only considered to be, again, a part of myth, Herodotus, who is known as the father of history, he's a really interesting person. I highly recommend looking him up. He lived around the 5th century BC. He gives a lengthy description of a meeting between the Amazons and the Scythians, a different nomadic tribe consisting of both men and women. So according to Herodotus, these people existed. Later archaeological examinations of burial mounds in the areas surrounded by the Scythian tribes and dating back to the time of Herodotus have uncovered around 300 warrior women buried with their horses and their armor and their arms, thus providing some real archaeological evidence of tribes of female warriors. Well, to be fair, it has not been proven that there were only female warrior tribes as depicted in Greek mythology. This does lend some evidence to the reality of these warriors. Number 5, the Oracle at Delphi. The Oracle of Delphi was the title of a high priestess at the temple of Apollo on top of the mountain of Delphi. Essentially, people would come from far and wide to ask the oracle questions about their future, and in a trance-like state, she would channel answers from Apollo and respond in some sort of a riddle that would make absolutely no sense at the time that she was saying it, but would end up revealing itself as technically true sometime in the future. Of course, a stoned teenage girl telling the future sounds like it must just be some sort of analogy for something else, and most people believe that this was the case, it didn't really exist. That is, until scientists found ethylene, methane, and ethane in the mountain where the Delphic oracle was located, right underneath where she would have been giving out these prophecies. Of particular interest here is ethylene, which is a hydrocarbon gas that produces a narcotic effect, including euphoria and an altered state when it's inhaled. So again, what's the discovery here? We have a person who was said to be in a trance-like state, giving out riddles as answers for the future for people's questions. And then we have a discovery which shows that the person who would have been giving out those riddles in the trance-like state probably was inhaling a gas that would have put her in a trance-like state. In other words, the description of the Oracle of Delphi was probably pretty accurate. This discovery again lends itself to the conclusion that there is a factual basis for this myth, and again explains how this myth may be based on true events. And this discovery, along with the other discoveries, in my view, are incredibly important for human history. They show that these things aren't just made-up stories, and I think that's important because contrary to some things like certain religions where we know people existed and we know that certain events happened, it's just whether or not you believe in some sort of higher power controlling things, etc. These events, for hundreds of years after, or thousands of years after they happened, were not believed to have existed. People wrote them off as myths, as descriptions of how events happened and that how these ancient Greeks were just describing things, etc. And then you have a bunch of evidence coming out in like the relatively recent future that proves that these things happened, or at least to a degree they happened. Feel free to debate with me in the comments on this, but in my opinion, these Greek myths not only have historical backing, but have influenced society ever since their inception. And that's the end of this one. If you want to learn more about the creation of the labyrinth and why a half-man, half-bull creature was being held on Crete, click here. If you want to learn more about Greek myths that influence our daily lives, or if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the bell notification for more videos in the days and weeks ahead. Thank you for watching.